great to be here back together again after that year pause that we've all endured. So welcome back. Happy Juneteenth as well. We're celebrating that today. My name is Matt Anderson. I am Curator of Transportation here at the Henry Ford, and we are getting ready to start our passenger review for our 1930s cars, moving into the 1940s cars. But I am lucky today to be joined by a couple of guests. First, we have Greg Ingold, who is the editor of the Hagerty Price Guide. Greg, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And then back joining us again is Andrew Beckman, the archivist at the fabulous Studebaker National Museum in South Bend, Indiana. Andy, how are you?
I'm doing great, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we've got a great collection of cars, and it looks like the weather is finally cooperating with us as well. So, all right, we're ready. I think we're starting with a 1933 Dodge DP6. There we go, car number 100, brought to us by John Connor of Sterling Heights, Michigan.
And the Dodge brand was, as we're familiar with today, part of the Chrysler Corporation, but it didn't start out that way. It was actually established by brothers John and Horace Dodge in 1914. Became part of Chrysler in 1928, and slotted as really the mid-price brand between the Plymouth brand on the bottom and the Chrysler badge up on the top end of the model line.
Yeah, Chrysler went on kind of a spending spree, I think, in the late 20s, turned themselves into a full-line producer almost overnight with, like you said, acquiring Dodge and introducing the low-price Plymouth as well.
It's amazing what they were able to achieve in just a short amount of time, because Chrysler itself really didn't exist until, early 1920s, and suddenly they become a major full-line, the third of the big three in just under a decade.
Yeah. I mean, this is really a beautiful car here. I mean, it's really well taken care of. Some notes about the mechanicals. The 201 cubic inch inline six, 75 horsepower. I mean, you look back a couple years before with the Model A. That's a significant jump from the 40 horsepower in a Model A. So I mean, this car is substantially more luxurious and more powerful than what was out there just a couple years before.
Yeah.
You see a period of great change in automotive design. Just looking at this car with the trunk that is literally a separate trunk hanging off the back of the car on a little platform. If any of you can see the top of the car, that is not a really big sunroof. That is actually a top insert. The all-steel turret top was still a few years off, and the construction methods really were still very much in the horse-drawn era of a wood frame body, and supplemented with fabric and other materials to enclose your car. Oh, that is an all-steel body. Okay.
There we go. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And you might want to lean right into the microphone. Great stuff, though.
Is that Marty?
Let's see who's next. It is. All right. Well, we'd recognize car 105. It's brought to us by Judy and Marty Buffalini, the 1936 Desoto Airstream. Fantastic. Marty, a long-time passenger reviewer narrator here. We miss you up here, Marty. Anytime you want to slide up on the stage here. Well, not anytime, but no. Glad to have you. And, a few words about Marty's Desoto.
Yeah, we're delighted, as Matt mentioned, 1936 Desoto Airstream. Listed brand new, just a mere $810 will put you into one of these. And if you're lucky to get one of the 13,093 examples built, offered in two trim levels. They have the Deluxe and the Custom lines. You got a new horizontal bar radiator grille, as well as little pennant-style hood louvers on the side. And I see Marty has already declared his a presidential candidate, it looks like, for the next election cycle. I didn't know Mr. Roosevelt was on the ballot, but he's dead. I missed it. Oh, goodness. That's how embarrassing.
Well, if Mr. Roosevelt were around, he'd see it in the same condition as it is in today, as it's reported to be unrestored. Mm-hmm. And at least from where we're sitting, it looks almost like a brand new car. Yeah. So, I mean...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Curator's Choice winner a couple of years ago. Absolutely, for unrestored.
If you get a chance to look at this car, I mean, take a look at the wonderful details like the striping on the wheels and just all little things that are often overlooked in a restoration today, but just as it came off the assembly line back in 1936.
Wonderful. I mean, it's really fantastic. I mean, you actively have to go and preserve a car in this sort of state to keep it as nice as it is today. So a really phenomenal example.
Yep. Fender skirts, dual windshield wipers, radio, heater, clock. Almost fully loaded. So, wonderful. Thank you, Marty. Appreciate it. Bye-bye. Let's see. Could we see your dash card, sir? Oh, 36 Desoto Airflow.
And I guess you would be Douglas? All right. 1936 DeSoto Airflow, exhibited by Douglas Barbrett of Casco, Michigan. And we notice he complements the Airstream we just saw, but you're seeing a very different car in front of you.
There we go. First car designed in a wind tunnel, with the aid of a wind tunnel for aerodynamics. So really a very modern look to this car.
And it really shows. I mean,
Yeah.
all of the flowing lines are very fluid on this car. I mean, it looks nothing like what you'd see back then. I mean, this is really, I mean, this must have looked space age back then.
Yeah, and fits right in with that theme of cars named for explorers in the DeSoto, LaSalle, Marquette, Cadillac for that matter. So.
And also another addition to the Chrysler Corporation stable of brands that they are, as we mentioned, rapidly, just really 12 years before, they started as Chrysler, and now you've got Chrysler, DeSoto, Dodge, and Plymouth, and the full line of Dodge commercial vehicles as well.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we have a Hupmobile, 1936 Hupmobile D618, exhibited by Matthew Hammond right here in Dearborn, Michigan. So thank you for being with us.
And the Hupmobile name might not be as familiar as some of the previous cars we've had through here, but it was made right just next door in Detroit, Michigan by the Hupp Motor Car Company. Hupp started producing vehicles in 1909 and actually held on until 1941. And we'll talk probably a little bit more about the Hupp when we get the Chord up here. And Mr. Hupp had worked at Ford, Olds, and also the Rio brands and began experimenting with a car of his own, which he completed in November of 1908.
Let's see here, the car primarily restored, looks like in 1988, 1999 by a collector in Connecticut. Is that right? And he would have gotten it from him. So, okay. Wonderful.
It held up fantastically since then.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Love that shade, too. Do you know the color, the name? Oh, is it? Okay, okay. Got it.
Not a 36 color, but it certainly looks of the period.
Yeah, beautiful.
And really, you'll notice kind of the early, we saw the airflow with the streamlining, and you see some of that with the Hupmobile in front of you too. Instead of the headlights standing out as separate pods, they're kind of fared into the front end sheet metal, and really a tremendous time of automotive design evolution during the 1930s.
Yeah, shift from the straight lines of the horse-drawn era, as you mentioned, to the rounded edges, the more streamlined modern look. So.
And even the radiator grill is slanted back to, you know, it gives you really the look of speed on this thing.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, no mistaking this car here, the number 103. Clearly a Chord with the famous coffin nose. And probably the reason they call it a coffin nose is fairly obvious, but the shape of the vehicle, that is determined in large part by its engineering. This is a front-wheel drive vehicle at a time when those were quite rare. Of course, now everything, it seems, is front-wheel drive, but not so when this car was introduced.
Yeah, I mean, this is really one of the early adopters of front-wheel drive, along with Auburn, and, you know, of course, this being with the Auburn Chord Duesenberg family, and you know, just a really, really fantastic Art Deco looking car. Love the hidden headlights, and yeah.
And you'll notice too that the absence of something on this car, the running boards, which were a
Yes.
given on cars prior to that, but now we're starting to realize the cars get lower, you really don't need them to step up into the vehicle.
And this car, we should mention, exhibited by Mr. James Herber right here in Dearborn, Michigan. This is a 1936 Chord 810 Westchester sedan. And you may sometimes hear people refer to the Chord 810 and the Chord 812. Well, what is the difference? Well, it's pretty simple. The 1936s were the 810s. The next year, they bumped it up to the 812. I don't know if there was something superstitious about the number 811 that they glossed over, but that's really the difference between the two.
That's right.
Quite an uncommon car too, with just over 1,700 built. Really a treat to see something like this out in the wild. I mean, you really don't see it outside of any sort of museum or private collection. So to see one out and actually driving is quite unusual.
And as I recall, those headlights too, they're hand crank, right? So you can wink with your car if you choose to by
There
just
it goes.
opening one light or the other. Fantastic.
It seems like that would be a lot of work to flash your headlights at someone, to
Yeah,
get their attention.
You don't want to flash to pass in this car. But wonderful. Thank you. I always think this kind of car Batman would drive, the original Batman of the 1930s comics. Yeah. Well, we were just speaking of Lasalle, and here we have one. I believe it's a 36 Lasalle. Sir, could we see your dash card? There, number 106.
So it is a 36 LaSalle.
Oh, they did, didn't they? Yes, yes. We should
Awesome.
take a moment to mention classic car. That's a term that gets thrown a lot. Folks use it to refer to really anything that's 25 years old or so, but there is a very specific meaning for that, isn't there?
Indeed, a full classic is certified by the Classic Car Club of America, and as we just mentioned, now anything produced under the LaSalle brand is considered a full classic and eligible for full classic events.
Yeah.
And this car is owned by Mr. John Bertolone. Did I get that close? From Sterling Heights, Michigan.
And he's owned the car for 55 years and did most of the restoration himself, and it looks professional from here, so great work.
We should say LaSalle was introduced as a part of the fad for what they called companion cars at the time. We would introduce a sort of a junior model of an existing car, and in this case, LaSalle was the junior Cadillac as introduced, and it offered you a lot of Cadillac luxury and a lot of Cadillac components, frankly, literally Cadillac parts at a somewhat more, shall we say, acceptable price. We'll say that. And LaSalle survived into the 30s. I think over time it became less a junior Cadillac, more a senior Buick, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the LaSalle kind of shifted its market, I guess. And on the companion car thing, Alfred Sloan said a car for every purse and purpose. And he wanted to get you in at the Chevrolet, and eventually you would stair-step your way as, like someone like Matt Anderson becomes more affluent in his bank book. Eventually he will be driving a Cadillac, but not if he worked at the Ford Museum. That would have to be a Lincoln.
No, I'll go with a Lincoln, but no, wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing it here. In 1941, they dropped the LaSalle line. Oh, LaSalle was outselling the Cadillac, you're saying. So, right, that you don't want to cut into the parent brand. That's bad news. So. No, that's a great point. Yeah, the cars like this helped carry GM through the Great Depression and the Cadillac brand in particular. So wonderful. Thank you for sharing the LaSalle with us.
And I believe Archie and Edith Bunker, weren't they also LaSalle owners?
That's right.
If you listen to the opening of All in the Family, GR Old LaSalle ran great.
That's right.
This could have been the car they were talking about.
39 LaSalle for the bunkers. There you go. Good trivia. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe a 1937 LaSalle is the car driven by Marcus Brody in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So file that in your useless trivia files.
My goodness, those LaSalles were everywhere.
That's right. There we go. Car 108, 1936 Buick Victoria Coupe. And comes to us courtesy Steve and Ella Hughes of Kimball, Michigan. So.
A little bit more acceptable price than the LaSalle at $835. So the LaSalle was almost $1,200 back then. So you can really see that point you were making before, that the LaSalle was that step between the Buick and the Cadillac.
You see the Buick, as mentioned, founded by David Dunbar Buick, one of those I'm not sure if you ask many people, certainly the name Henry Ford comes to mind, but they might struggle a little bit to come up with the other two names for Mr. Buick. We mentioned the tops on one of the, I think it was the earlier Lasalle that came through where they had the insert in there. Well, for 1936, you're starting to see more modern features come in. It's a full steel turret top. Hydraulic brakes are now becoming accepted, with one notable exception. Mr. Ford still felt very strongly about the safety of steel from pedal to wheel, and it would take a few more years from that. Improved front suspension, improved materials, new aluminum alloy pistons, and options on this particular car. We talk about you could get a heater, dual side mounts, fog lights, really a whole laundry list of anything to outfit your car exactly the way you want it.
And unless I'm mistaken, I think Buick is the first car we've had through today that the brand is still around today, right? Because we've been talking about Desotos and Chords and so forth. And it is, in fact, the oldest extant American automobile brand. So fantastic. Thank you.
Beautiful car.
It's unrestored as well.
Unrestored. Oh, unrestored. We love to give a hand to the unrestored cars. Number 102. Clearly a Ford here. Looks like a 1934, so we're going back in time just a couple of years. That's all right. We'll have you here.
And another brand that is still with us.
Yeah, well, that's right. Another brand. Yes, Ford, of course, still here. But this car, I think all the magic here is under the hood with the Ford V8. The flathead, introduced a couple of years earlier in 1932. Not the first V8 by any stretch of the imagination. For that matter, really not the first mass-produced V8. Cadillac had introduced one several years earlier. But the Ford V8 was affordable, and it was largely so because Henry Ford built it as a monoblock unit. In other words, the engine block, the crankcase, and the cylinder banks were all one piece. And of course, the fewer pieces you're casting, the less expensive it is to produce the engine, the less expensive it is to sell the engine to the customer. So it really democratized horsepower in that sense.
Oh, Matt, I think there's a typo on my sheet here.
Oh, no.
They left the U out of four-door on it. Or is that the way it's supposed to be? Tell us about that.
That's, they love their puns, right? So it's four-door, not F-O-U-R, but F-O-R-D-O-R, Ford-or. Yeah.
I'd like to mention this is also owned by Lauren Moore of Dearborn, Michigan.
Yes.
And of course, what color could this possibly be but Dearborn Blue?
Dearborn Blue. Love that
Beautiful.
name. It's like Bonnie and Clyde. That's right. We've got a couple of letters in the museum archives there. One purported to have been written by Clyde of Bonnie and Clyde. Another said to have been written by John Dillinger, both sent to Henry Ford, basically complimenting him on the Ford V8, saying it was a cracking car. And I believe it's Dillinger who says, I love to drive one whenever I can get away with one, which in his case, literally so, right? Stealing the car.
Well, it was the performance car of the era,
Yeah.
unless you wanted to go all the way up to a Duesenberg. So
Yeah.
it really put performance into the hands of the masses.
Yeah.
And just for comparison, we're talking about 1932 85 horsepower V8, whereas what was the Model A putting out at that time? 40?
40.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like
40,
40, right,
45.
right.
You're talking twice the power
Yeah,
from just a year before.
Yeah.
Just an amazing increase in output.
tremendous. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, it's a Cadillac, no question about that. Another brand still with us today, and Cadillac, of course, named for the founder of Detroit, or the
Can we see your
original
number
French
plate?
officer who established the city in 1701, Antoine de la Mole Cadillac. And Cadillac has kind of an interesting history. The company is really birthed out of the remains, or the ruins, if you will, of Henry Ford's second automobile company. After that failed, the Lelands came in and took it over, Henry Leland and his son, and really rebuilt the brand into the successful Cadillac, which ultimately merged to become a part of General Motors and become the capstone of the General Motors brand ladder that Alfred Sloan had dreamed up, and of course remains in that position today. Yeah,
we just saw really the very affordable version of the V8 engine, and now we see kind of the ultimate, the other end of the spectrum, the V8 engine. This powered by a 346 cubic inch L-head, flathead V8, similar in design to the Ford. However, this would set you back $2,795 in 1937. What could you get a Ford V8 for in
around
1930?
$500, I think. So yes,
So that would be less.
considerable price difference. Yes.
And we're also seeing a body style that is gone by the wayside in today's market. I would love it if someone could bring back a convertible sedan, but as its name implies, it is a four-door sedan with convertible top, the ultimate for open-air touring if you want to go out.
Well, I want to mention that that he notes here that this car was last driven in 1978, and he got it running again over 2020. So,
Hey, pandemic project.
congratulations! Thank you for getting that back on the road.
And Eric McLeod of the Cereal City, Battle Creek, Michigan. So we appreciate you coming all this way to be with us.
Sorry.
Yeah, Cadillac would have been founded, I think, right around the time that Detroit was celebrating its bicentennial in 1901. So that name would have been floating in the air. All right, next up, number 113, a 1937 Chevrolet Master two-door town sedan, brought to us courtesy John and Charlene Benzik of Dearborn, Michigan. Did I pronounce that right? All right. and Chevrolet, another brand, of course, that is with us today. And they are, we're spotlighting racing this year. And we should say, a lot of cars have models named after racetracks or even race drivers. I can think of only one mainstream company, anyway, that was named for a racing driver. And that, of course, is Chevrolet, named for Louis Chevrolet, the great Swiss-French race driver who competed several times in the Indianapolis 500. He met with Billy Durant. They agreed to produce a car. I think this was after Durant had been kicked out of GM basically for the first time.
Yeah, I was going to say, which time?
Yeah, not the last, the first time. And, they agreed to build this car with Chevrolet's name on it as a way of marketing it. And I think they had a parting of the ways over what the car should be. Louis Chevrolet saw it as being a performance car, something perhaps a little more expensive, whereas Durant was looking at a direct competitor to the Model T, which is what Chevrolet ended up being. So sadly, Louis Chevrolet left the company before it would have made him wealthy, but it did make him famous. His name, of course, survives today, very well known.
I'm getting the urge to see the USA right now, Matt. I got to tell you. What car should I take to do that?
In your Chevrolet, that's right.
This car here is a 37 Master two-door sedan. I really have a soft spot for these. We had one in the garage when I was growing up, and we just like this one. This car, he reports, is unrestored. I've seen it up close. It's a very, very beautiful car for as old as it is. It's been very well cared for.
Yeah. It's a California car, you say? What? There we go. Member of the Vintage Chevrolet Club of America. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate you sharing the car with us today.
Beautiful car.
Another Buick.
Yeah, 1937 Buick Century Coupe, brought to us courtesy Stephen Wrinkle of Clinton Township, Michigan.
See,
so compared to the Chevrolet that we just saw, the Buick's a little bit of a step up. Instead of the straight 6, we have a straight 8 under the hood, so a little bit more power. Very similar styling to the Chevrolet, although you have a little bit longer bonnet on this car, and 320 cubic inches. 130 horsepower, which is pretty substantial for that time.
Indeed, and this is the Buick Century model. And Buick had the 4 basic models in their lineup. The Century, this was a step above the basic Special, and next up you had the Roadmaster and Limited models. So you could, again, kind of Alfred Sloan's wanting to have a car for every price point and move your way up the GM company ladder.
Well, and also, the Century name comes from the fact that Buick claimed that it would do 100 miles an hour back then, which is a substantial amount of speed for the 1930s.
Absolutely.
We should note that Buick, we've talked about the 8 cylinders through here before. Those were V8 engines in both a flathead or L-head design. Buick had a different approach. They're inline 8-cylinder engines, but they featured overhead valves. In fact, that was really a selling feature. And some of the Buick engines I've seen, actually, it says on the side of the cover, valve in head. Does yours have that? Yep, valve in head. They were very proud of their overhead valve units. The other companies that did not would quickly tout, of course, the superiority of the L-head side valve engines. But as you see, the overhead valve arrangement eventually won out.
Very forward thinking.
Wonderful. Love that red, too. Carmine Red, I think is the name. Gorgeous. I think David Dunbar Buick, a little like Louis Chevrolet, he made his fortune in plumbing fixtures and then started building cars at the turn of the century when that was the hot new technology and merged with Billy Durant. The rest is history. All right, car number 109. The 1937 Dodge D5 brought to us by Gerald and Christine Kowalski of West Bloomfield, Michigan.
Yeah, and he's owned this car since 1982 and received a frame-off restoration with it in the time of his ownership, and just an absolutely stunning car. We, the Hagerty Youth Judges came by, and he showed us all around the vehicle earlier, and the kids were very, very excited to see it, so thank you very much.
We should note the two-door, the business coupe style. Speaking of body styles that we really don't see anymore, the business coupe intended for the traveling salesman to have ample space in the trunk to carry his wares, but and really they would call these a three-passenger cars. Judging by the three of us up here, I'd say this is probably a two-passenger car if we were going to be riding.
No way.
We do have three in the car, though.
We do have three.
They've done it.
There you
Shoehorn
go.
them in. That's right. No, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Should mention it's optioned with the dual horns.
Oh,
So
yes.
you have the two-tone horn.
We got a sample of that. Wonderful. I think this is our first foreign mark we've had come through this afternoon, so that's exciting.
And now for something completely different.
That's right.
1938 MGSA from Lee Jacobson, right out of here in Dearborn.
I love this body style. The Tickford Drophead Foursome is its official name, according to our paperwork here. I don't know. That sounds a little more posh than business coupe, don't you think, guys?
Yes,
that it
yes,
does.
it does.
Yeah, Tea and Crumpet Society. There's some interesting features on this car. The top speed said to be better than 80 miles an hour, which again, an impressive speed for that era. And then a jack-all system, right? Jacks built into the car, so if you get that flat, it basically lifts itself up off the ground to change.
And the MG stands for the company Morris Garages. I believe was the
Mighty
Mighty
Good.
Good,
That's
okay.
it, sure.
Well, our apologies.
that's the one I thought you were going for, Lee, when you said that initially. And to look at this car compared to the MGs that we saw as kids going around, I mean, just a completely different version of automobile. I mean, I look at this and I see an expansive long wheelbase with luxury and many other features, really far technically superior to what many in the U.S. were putting out at that time.
Yeah, and Lee mentions here he did all the work on the engine himself. It took him 32 years, but to be fair, 10 minutes a day, right? So doesn't seem so bad.
Now, it says here top speed said to be better than 80 miles an hour. Lee, are you the one who actually said that?
You've driven it that fast, so
Okay.
you can attest to that. and maybe one of the more divisive is the word for it on the hood mascot there. You notice that is a mosquito or a midge, as they would call it in the UK.
The Michigan State bird, well, the unofficial one.
Right. We have mixed feelings on mosquitoes. It looks lovely on your car.
I
though,
have
so
no mixed feelings about mosquitoes. I have strong opinions about them.
There you go. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
I love the green on that, too.
Yeah.
That-
Well, back to the blue oval here. Another Ford V8. And as we mentioned again, this engine is just revolutionized manufacturing and the availability of higher horsepower
Let me see
power
your number,
plants.
please.
The Ford V8 flathead design remained in production really into the 1950s. And we're going to be talking about it more when we do our racing presentation later this afternoon, because it is the foundation of much of modern racing in that you could buy these engines rather inexpensively to start with, and certainly even less expensive when they were used. And there was a whole aftermarket parts industry built around these engines as well, which really launched American racing in the 1930s, especially the late 40s after World War II.
And it really was the hot rodders engine of choice for the longest time, all the way through the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you consider the ripple effect of that engine, just meant to be an affordable power plant, and the effect it's had on the entire automotive industry, from hot rodding to racing to, and just the huge numbers that were sold in Ford automobiles. Even after they stopped, am I correct on this, Matt? They were still continued producing the flatheads even after they stopped putting them in the cars?
Yeah, I think that's right, because the aftermarket was so strong, and of course the parts. We should say this is a 1939 Ford Deluxe convertible coupe brought to us by James and Jean Ross of Farmington Hills, Michigan. Oh, thank you.
And this is the year that the safety of steel from pedal to wheel gave way to, wait for it, hydraulic brakes. Mr. Ford decided it was time, and this was the first year that they were introduced on the Ford brand.
Yeah, Chrysler had, I think, the hydraulics about 15 years earlier than Ford. He was a little
Well,
slow
they don't want to
do
rush
it.
into things.
That's right. Take your time.
And I love the fact you have your rumble seat open. Again, another feature I wish would come back to cars in some way, shape, or form, although I imagine there would have to probably be 9 airbags back there to satisfy traffic safety requirements. If you've never ridden in a rumble seat, it is really quite a treat and an adventure. I would stress doing it at lower speeds rather than on the Ford Freeway, for example, might be your best option. Also, you have to be fairly agile because you have to step on the right things. I'm sure that James would not like you to mar his beautiful paint finish on there, but they would thoughtfully put these little steps on there so you could get your way in there delicately and gentlemanly as possible.
Once you do ride in it, you will understand why it is called a rumble seat, I think, too.
I can think of some other names for it too, but we'll discuss those later.
Well, mother-in-law seat. That's right. That is another name that's used sometimes. Does no favor to. Well, I'm glad it's Father's Day weekend, not Mother's Day weekend. I wouldn't want to use that joke then.
My mother-in-law is a very nice lady.
That's
so.
right.
Yeah, mine is delightful as well.
But no, wonderful car. Thank you very much. Well, when you talk about luxury and American manufacturing, you're generally talking about the 3 Ps, right? Pierce Arrow, Peerless, and this one, Packard.
Now, should we talk about this, Matt, or should we just ask the owner? It seems to me there's something about that in Packard lore.
One of the greatest advertising slogans in automotive history, Packard's, was simply ask the man who owns one. And I love it. It's so simple. It's so basic. It's so honest. And it says essentially that, our cars do the advertising for us. Don't come to us. Ask someone who owns one.
And can we see your number, please, so we can properly credit? 125.
And Packard, you'll notice the distinctive, what they would call a tombstone shaped grille there on the front there covering the radiator. And that had been a Packard hallmark really from the beginning and right up until the end, frankly, and set the cars apart from others. Really their own design cue.
And this is a Packard 120 convertible sedan from Jeffrey and Jennifer Bladow of Plymouth, Michigan. And Packard had, for many years, strictly luxury cars. Their line, what was it, the commercial with Orson Welles, we shall make no wine before it's time.
That's right.
You could say that Packard was going to make the cars they wanted to build for their market, and they would cost what they cost. Well, in the Depression, suddenly the luxury car market dried up, and Packard was forced to really introduce more of a mass-produced model, and that's where the 120 came in. And it's, many credit is the car that really saved Packard from the graveyard from the other luxury marques during this period. And Packard was able to continue on, and the 120 essentially rendered the senior models to very minuscule sales, and they were eventually discontinued after World War II.
When you think about it, really, of all the luxury American makes that made it into the Depression, the only ones that really made it out were Cadillac, Lincoln, and Packard. And yes, the 120 deserves most of the credit for Packard surviving.
And we should mention, too, that Cadillac and Lincoln had the benefits of being part of Ford and
Yes.
General Motors.
Yes.
Packard was still their own company and independent until they merged with Studebaker in the mid-1950s.
Although this is not one of the senior models, this is still, you look at the build quality of this car and the attention to detail. I mean, even though it's not a 12, it certainly has the same attention to detail and the same luxury appointments as some of the larger cars. And so I mean, Packard really, you can tell with this car that Packard really paid attention to making sure that you still got the Packard experience.
And you see some of the other details of the streamlining effects of the 1930s. The spare tires are now faired into the fenders. Packard was still a little more conservative in their design. They still had the pod headlights after a number of manufacturers had fared them into the fenders. You see the windshield is V'd. And also take a close look at the radiator mascot up there as well. I believe is this the Goddess of Speed mascot? There's another name that I'm not saying should use. In some circles, I've heard that called the Donut Chaser. And I think Goddess of Speed might be the one we go with from here on out.
It's a little
You good with that,
classier.
guys?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Really, the testament to quality on that engine build is we couldn't
Yeah,
even hear that
very-
thing pull away.
Very quiet.
I just thought it was an electric myself. It was so quiet.
We've got another caddy here. 130 something.
130.
Can we see your dash number there? 133.
Three.
There we go. Make sure we can introduce you properly here.
Yeah, 1941 Cadillac, model 6227, exhibited by Philip and Helen Fisher of Plymouth, Michigan. Now, does this have a Fisher body? All
Yeah,
right.
Body by Fisher.
Oh, no relation. As we mentioned, for many years on GM cars, you would see a little tag on there that said "Body by Fisher," and in fact, Fisher was one time, their own company, but were acquired by General Motors as essentially their primary in-house coach builder for just about all the brands.
Yeah, the little Fisher coach was the logo they used for many years. You'd see that on the door sill.
On this, and this 41 Cadillac has a front end that really continued on through post-war and into the late 40s and beyond. This is really a style that continued on for a very long time. But it's even post-war, it still very modern and very good looking.
Yeah, beautiful car. Thank you so much.
Should note it finished in Berkshire Green.
Berkshire
And
Green.
this is the original finish.
Yes,
Wow.
beautiful. And I love the appropriate buy war bond sticker in the back, because of course this is right as the U.S. gets into World War II, and then effectively American automotive industry ceases to exist as we know it for the duration of the war, as they're building weapons for war, tanks, airplanes, war material, all those sorts of things.
And actually, the tanks shared the very same engine that was in the Cadillac we just saw.
Here we go. Well, here we go. Here's a car that needs no introduction, but we shall give it
Beautiful.
one just the same. A gorgeous Lincoln Continental, which was the brainchild of Edsel Ford, the only son of Henry and Clara Ford. And we should say a few words about Edsel while we're here. We talk more about him in Old Car Festival, just given the time frame. But, for all of Henry's abilities in the machining of a car, if you will, the engineering, the design of the vehicle, he really had no sense for what a car should look like. The Model T was a lot of things. Stylish, it was not. Edsel Ford, however, was able to bring that sort of artistic eye to the production of Ford vehicles and Lincoln vehicles. And we could go into all kinds of details about the somewhat struggled relationship that Henry and Edsel had with each other. But we'll have to say that Edsel really did have Lincoln as a sort of a professional haven. He had free reign there to do as he would. And working with the designers and engineers there, produced the Lincoln Continental, introduced for the 1940 model year. Absolutely gorgeous car, and established many of the cues we associate with high-performance luxury vehicles, particularly the long hood we see in the front, the short rear deck in the back. The car just looks fast, even standing still.
This is our first V12 powered vehicle that we've seen up here. 292 cubic inch, making 120 horsepower. I mean, if you want to talk luxury, V12 is where it's at. I mean, even it is today as much as it was prior to the war. This is smooth running, good power. That's the way you need. That's the way the wind was blowing back then. More cylinders, more power.
We should note that this car is exhibited by Jim and Linda Holliday of Clarkston, Michigan. And just kind of to expound a little more on the styling, just looking at this car, it looks so sculpted. It's not, it doesn't look like it, to me, it was like stamped out of just machines and bolted together. It's like such attention was paid to, the surface transitions, the different shapes, how they meld together. Everything kind of flows from front to rear. As we said, in stark contrast to perhaps some other earlier products in the company lineup.
Yes, indeed. The wonderful car. Again, the brainchild of Edsel Ford and Bob Gregory as well. We should give him credit.
Oh, and I love the door handles. There are no door handles, just a push button.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still widely regarded as one of the most beautiful American production automobiles. Well, we've got another Ford here for sure. If we could see your dash
Can we see your
plaque,
number, please?
Oh, 138. We're post-war now, as we say. The auto industry effectively shut down during World War II so that they could produce war materiel. Most famously, B-24s being built by Ford out at Willow Run, but also Jeeps, light armored cars, really things of any description you might imagine, right on down to helmets.
So we have a 1946 Ford Deluxe Business Coupe. There's that body style again, exhibited by Fred and Vernita Stone of Livonia, Michigan.
And it's really interesting to see how immediately post-war, it's like automotive production never ceased, because it's like the next model year came out. I mean, this is still a very pre-war looking car, even though we are immediately post-war. It takes years and years to design and test a vehicle, so you might as well use the old tooling and get it back out with a few styling changes here and there where you can get away with it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And there was a tremendous demand for new cars after the war, because remember, not only had people not been able to buy cars for the duration of the war, most folks hadn't been buying new cars during the Great Depression. So you're looking at a time span of close to 15 years where it simply wasn't practical or possible to buy a new vehicle.
Indeed. We see this is one feature that we've seen on most of the cars come through here, but the cowl vent right in front of the windshield. Another, modern cars generally take in most of the air for the heating and ventilation systems under the windshield, but in the old days, you just popped open the lever and it introduces a huge amount of air, great for keeping the car cool on hot summer days. This air is not filtered except for the screen that keeps out bugs and maybe larger pieces of gravel, so there is some downside to that. I will say I do love the cabin air filter in the modern cars, but other things too. We see the spotlight. Today exclusively it seems the domain of law enforcement vehicles, but at one time you could get single if not dual spotlights on just about every automobile of this era.
Good of you to spotlight that feature.
Stick around, folks. Matt Anderson will be here all night. Tip your servers.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Oh, and I see a bump in horsepower on that one, Matt, up from the 221 to the 239 version of the famous flathead V8.
There we go. Well, speaking of wartime production, we've got a Willys Overland Jeepster here, and we should say just a word about the Jeep. The initial design of that vehicle was done by American Bantam, I think, in Pittsburgh. And, of course, to build enough of them for the Allied war effort, the federal government basically decided that Bantam just didn't have the capacity to do it. So instead, they awarded the contracts to Ford and to Willis in Toledo. And car makers being car makers, both companies tried to improve the design produced initially by American Bantam to the point where the government had to step in and say, no, this is what you will build, because obviously whether a Jeep's built by Ford or by Willis, the parts have to be entirely interchangeable so you can service it in the field.
Now, the styling for the Jeepster was handled by an industrial designer based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin by the name of Brooks Stevens. If the name is not familiar for you, he did some later work for Studebaker, but he's also the man who brought us the original Lawn Boy lawnmower and something near and dear to all three of us up here, the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
That's right, that's right. And this is a 1948 Willis Overland Jeepster exhibited by Tom Swenson of Hazel Park, Michigan.
And you pretty much got the drivetrain that was in the rest of the Jeep lineup. The base engine was a 134.2 cubic inch four-cylinder engine. Although you could later on in the 49 model year, they finally introduced a six-cylinder version as well.
Although, unlike what you'd expect with a Jeep, this one is two-wheel drive. This is more of a road-going vehicle. They build it as a Phaeton, much more like a luxury vehicle than you'd expect from a utility vehicle that we see Jeep as today.
And if some of you are basketball fans out there, take a close look at the W on the wheels, on the hubcaps, and then take a look at the Santa Cruz Warriors, the G League team of the NBA's Golden State Warriors. You might notice some similarities between the two.
Well, that's trivia. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I think it's the first time we've ever brought up the Santa Cruz Warriors at Motor Muster.
I'm glad we had the chance to do that. So wonderful. Obviously, Willis got the rights to produce the Jeep after the war, even though Ford had built them as well. And ultimately, they became part of the AMC family, then became a part of Chrysler, or Stellantis today, is the Jeep brand, still one of the crown jewels in their outfit.
I thought they just were bought up by Microsoft, but that might not be true. Is that no?
I don't
okay, that might be premature. Don't go buying stock.
That's right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, another Cadillac here for sure.
142, we lost our car.
Lost their car. We'll let you come through just the same. So, car number 142 here. And a 1947 Cadillac 62, brought to us by Roger and Beverly Melton of Bloomfield Village, Michigan. Thank you.
Well, I look at this car and it just screams luxury back at me, I got to say here, guys. In the classic Cadillac V8 engine. I see the 47. It listed as the overhead valve. I think there was this flathead or... Yeah.
Flathead, okay.
Yeah, it was still the flathead, I believe the 346 cubic inch version that year. But, at this time, what's good for General Motors is good for America. I look at a car that just says post-war prosperity. You're going to go out, you're going to buy yourself a new Cadillac so the neighbors can say, my goodness, that guy bought a new Cadillac. You see, you get the dual exhaust system standard on here, the big white wall tires. Is this I assume automatic transmission?
Very luxurious.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, the automatic transmission really debuts in serious production with the Hydromatic, which is introduced in the late 1930s, and then it's actually improved, frankly, in its use in military applications during the war, and then becomes more of a mainstream product after the war, and very quickly adapted, and almost the only transmission available today. But
and you see also, post-war styling is evolving. The cars are getting lower. You see the fenders are not the separate extensions from the body. They're more integrated to the body. You see the actually fender line is fared back into the door, and kind of still a pontoon look there, but you're seeing it to what would become the all-envelope universal flush-sided bodies that came a few years later.
But it still has some of that pre-war styling in the front there that I talked about with the 41. I mean, you still have, they're still hanging on a little bit there, and you can see that there while they're advancing the styling throughout the car.
Yes, Roger, you
In order to shift into reverse, next you go to reverse drive, then you go to reverse. Reverse it, grind it out.
right. They hadn't settled on the PRN DL or D1. This is that we're all used to today. So everybody had their own shift pattern, which is a dangerous thing if you're shifting right from drive into reverse without passing through neutral first. You, of course, inadvertently hit something or someone, heaven forbid. So important point.
Well, thank you very much. Absolutely beautiful car.
Appreciate it. I believe in those days they wouldn't even call it a shifter on those Hydromatic transmissions. They referred to it as a range selector because they wanted to let you know that it was purely automatic. This was no way like your manual transmission.
Gee, Matt, I'm looking at a 1948 Mercury truck here, but he said teeing it up for you. I didn't know Mercury made trucks. Tell us about this.
Indeed. We're looking at a 1948 Mercury M47 exhibited by Roy Marvel of Livonia, Michigan.
And this would be the Canadian counterpart to the Ford pickup post-war. So very, very unique vehicle to see here in the States. Here, they're still hard to find across the border as well. So, but very, very similar styling to the Ford pickups, but although they just branded it as a Mercury.
Yeah.
They did some of the same stuff with GM, with the Beaumont and Acadian, and as well as the Meteor brand.
Yeah. And this is really the look of the first series of the Ford F-Series pickups, which of course still in production, still Ford's bread and butter today. It's also, I think, the start of a long process to sort of refine the pickup truck. Initially, certainly at this time, it's a utility vehicle, right? It's something you use on the farm, on the ranch, or if you're delivering goods, whatever it might be. But over time, more and more amenities are added to the truck, and it becomes really more refined, more livable, perhaps is the word for it. Whereas by the 90s, it's a perfectly acceptable alternative to the family sedan.
And you should notice some things that were still optional extras on, like pickup trucks, for example. Either you're missing a windshield wiper, or there is only one. As in many companies, on the very bare bones model, you got one windshield wiper, and in some cases, one sun visor and just one tail light. And it was still a few years off before, by gosh, you were going to get that extra windshield wiper to standard equipment.
That's right. Well, you want to save money wherever you can.
Indeed,
right?
indeed.
Well, that is beautiful. It's always a pleasure to see these trucks. They've become, and I think it's true, they've become pretty collectible in the last decade or so, partly because a lot of them don't survive, right? They live hard lives by design almost.
Absolutely, and it's the trucks have really become the in thing. Much like muscle cars did a couple decades ago. Trucks are now the very trendy thing to have. It's almost as much of a lifestyle purchase as it is a collector vehicle to drive around. So you can do so much with them.
Thank you. Make sure we wrap up by 2, but I think we're in good shape. I see the 49s. So. Well, we're back in the UK again here.
Did you see the
If we could see your number. 143. There we go.
Well, I believe we are looking at the sports car that America loved first. An
That's right. This is
MGTC.
the progenitor of the Corvette and the Thunderbird and all that will follow. A lot of American GIs would be overseas. They would see these small, lightweight sports cars in Europe and in the UK in particular, and many of them would import these cars to the U.S. And it was, a few years later, GM starts to recognize there's some potential here and introduce the Corvette. But I get ahead of our story here.
Yeah, we are looking at, as mentioned, 1948 MGTC, exhibited by Dirk van den Musenberg. I struggle with it every year, Dirk. I'm really sorry, but I think I'm on a run here of getting it right each year. Base price back in 1948, 527 UK pounds, and if you don't have your little conversion tables handy, that was about, it says $824 equivalent at the time. Production about 10,000. And as a kid growing up, for some reason I always had books that dealt with cars, and there was a book called The Red Car by Don Stanford, which focused on an MGTC. A high school kid in Colorado had bought a wrecked MGTC against his family's wishes, and with the help of a mechanic at the local gas station, who just happened to be a retired racing driver, they managed to bring the TC back to life. I won't spoil how it ends for you, but great book if you can pick it up. And every year I see this car and I think, my gosh, that's the car it's the red car. It's an MGTC. Beautiful.
Interesting fact about the MGTC is that even though they exported quite a few to the U.S., they still came in as right-hand drive. So if you wanted your MGTC, you had to learn how to drive with the other hand on the gear shifter. So probably something that confused a lot of other people as to why they're driving on the wrong side of the car, but that's the way it was. It's proper.
I got to think what just as the average American driver, the Cadillac is still parked up over here. Imagine you're out on the road in your luxurious Cadillac and you come across an automobile that looks like this, unlike anything you've ever seen before. It's low slung with, let's face it, not a lot of creature comforts there. Underneath the tonneau cover in the back is a modest luggage compartment, has a rear-mounted spare. You probably think you last saw that on a 1920s Roadster. But these things are an absolute blast to drive. Yes, the Cadillac would take it on the open highway, but if you get on the twisties, forget it. The MG's going to leave it in the dust.
That's right. A sports car in the original sense of the word. Absolutely. So.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. We have a Frazer Manhattan here. Number 146, brought to us by Theo Odell of Milan, Michigan, a 1948 Frazer Manhattan. And we mentioned how the post-war market was really a seller's market, right? People wanted cars from any source. So if you were going to get back into the car business or try to create your own car company, it was really your best shot at doing it since the first decade of the 20th century.
And this, we talked about, again, on the Cadillac, that you started to see the fenders really being fared into the bodywork. This car here was really the first to actually eliminate the separate pontoon fender, and you see it as part of the overall design of the car. You see a little character line, but you don't really call out the lower section of the belt line. But there's no real separate fender on there. It's more of a all-inclusive envelope styling that was coming into vogue.
Now, we should say it was a partnership between Henry Kaiser and Joseph Frazer, who introduced their first models in 1947.
Not the boxer.
No, not that Joe Frazer, no. But early sales were encouraging for Kaiser Frazer, and they stood apart in the look of the Big Three. We mentioned how the Big Three building essentially new versions of their earlier models, not a whole lot in the way of styling updates, whereas KF could come fresh out of the box there, Kaiser Frazer.
And really very much... Henry Kaiser had built Liberty ships just in crazy numbers during the World War II, and it was really, I guess, kind of a natural thing. The car production should be no problem for him, and indeed, as Matt mentioned, they were very popular out of the gate, as was just about anything else anyone could build after World War II.
And Frazer was the senior line in the Kaiser Frazer. The Kaisers would be at a lower price point, but nothing quite says luxury and sophistication like Manhattan as a model name. So I think they drive that point home very well.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, I also mentioned powered by 226 cubic inch inline six, manufactured by Continental, and longtime engine manufacturer.
Built at Willow Run, we should point out, too, where Ford was building the B-24s. Of course, after the war, the Kaiser Frazer used the plant. So wonderful. Thank you. We look at an example now of Ford's first all-new post-war design, the 1949 Ford, a distinctive automobile and an important one in the company's history. We talked a little bit about Edsel Ford. We should talk about his son, Henry Ford II, grandson of Henry Ford. Now, Edsel Ford sadly passed away from stomach cancer in 1943, at which point his father resumed running the company, at a point, frankly, when his father should have probably retired. He was physically and frankly mentally failing at that point. The company had some very difficult years until finally they had a moment where they realized it was time for the next generation to step in. So Henry Ford II came in to take the presidency of Ford Motor Company. And this was an important car, the 49 Ford, really the first one introduced under his leadership. And it was a home run, I think. And it's number 156, is that the dash card? No, excellent.
Yep.
So it's a 49 Ford custom wagon brought to us by Dan and Lee Duskowitz of Livonia, Michigan.
And again, the body styles we do not see anymore. The wood-bodied station wagon, in particular, the two-door station wagon. It's the first time I saw one of these as a kid that just I couldn't really wrap my head around this. I'd grown up with four-door station wagons. Who knew they made a two-door? But that was really many times the only station wagon you could get in the early years. And of course, the Woody, the name comes naturally. You see the wood-sided appliques on there. In some cases, early wood-bodied station wagons, the whole coachwork from the cowl back was all fashioned out of wood. We see this is more of a composite assembly, but still very much in the Woody vogue.
And that wood body built up at Iron Mountain, Michigan, where Ford had a plant in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, close to a sawmill and lumber and so forth. Again, the idea of Henry Ford to control all of the materials that go into his car.
Still a flathead powered car. Has the 239 horsepower flathead. I'm sorry, 239 cubic inch flathead at 100 horsepower. Out of these cars, still 31,412 cars built. So still a pretty substantial.
And we'd be remiss if we did not point out the airplane influence that was the whole
right.
aeronautics influence kind of filtering its way through the post-war design themes. You see the big bullet spinner up front, again, to kind of evoke the center spinner on an airplane, and also went to use by great success with Studebaker as well.
Yes,
I had to get the plug in there.
No, I think it's fair to say that the Bullet is owned by Studebaker, so to speak. So thank you very much. Another 49 Ford here, brought to us by Cy and Joan Boudreau of Dearborn Heights, Michigan. And another point here to make, and another envelope-style body here without those separate fenders. The balloon fender looked very smooth. Slab side, sometimes referred to it that way.
Yeah, and this is the all-new post-war Ford. We see, as we've talked about earlier, just about everyone dusted off their pre-war styling cues and the old production dies and started stamping out essentially pre-war models. But Ford 1949 came out with almost the all-new car, still used the drivetrains and engines from the previous models, but brand new styling from the Ford Motor Company that year.
Another note about this car is it was purchased from the original family and then received a body-on restoration. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Beautiful car.
Looks like we've got a couple of Chevys coming onto the stage here. 159 and 154. 159 is a 1949 Chevrolet Fleetline Deluxe brought to us by Jerry and Beverly Schmidt of Detroit, Michigan.
153.
All right,
And again, Chevrolet introducing a new look for its post-war cars, and a little slower than the independent. Studebaker, I think, famously first by far with a post-war car, right?
Indeed, you nailed it there, Matt. Behind the first Chevy, we have a 1949 Chevrolet Style Line Deluxe exhibited by Jack and Cheryl Kimberly of Akron, Ohio.
And again, the envelope body, though, there is a bit of a rear fender on these cars with those chrome stone shields, they would be referred to protect the paint there in the car as stones and chips and so forth are thrown up from the road.
But you see, and the two different body styles, and you kind of see the fastback styling on some of it, kind of almost. I think it's almost, might say they kind of back their way into it a little bit with just cars getting lower, and the fastback just resulted from that naturally. But we see, I've always loved the fastback design on these early post-war Chevrolets. In fact, my Aunt Blanche had one of these sitting in her garage when I was a kid. I remember being fascinated by that. She didn't drive it anymore, but it was still in the garage. In fact, I wonder if it's still there to this day. But and then we see on the other side the Style Line Deluxe, again with the notchback styling. Again, both two-door cars, but you could get a couple variations from your friendly Chevrolet dealer.
both still powered by the tried and true Chevrolet six-cylinder. Of course, Chevrolet would not come out with a V8 option in their cars until '55. So one bit of difference between Ford and Chevrolet from the time.
It's true. And indeed, that six-cylinder Chevrolet nickname, the Stove Bolt 6. Yes. I've heard some other names for it as well. That was not one. They weren't bleeping me. I was not. I was not uttering profanity. I assure you.
No bad language. Wonderful. Thank you both for being here with us. We appreciate it. Another Packard, and we mentioned that front end grill treatment, and you see it here as well. That tombstone shape, even though it's of course a much different, generally shaped grill than what we saw earlier. But here's Packard post-war.
Hey, can we see your numbers, sir? 153.
153, it sounds like. Yeah, 1949 Packard Deluxe 8, brought to us by Paul and Jean Gallagher of Wyandotte, Michigan, just downriver.
Though if we're really being in keeping with Packard tradition, we should really not mention the model year and just mention this is a 23rd series Packard. Packard didn't really adhere to a model year, even though they kind of lined up, but they had series. So the next series would come out, and it would be heralded as the 24th series after this. Although I think they likely skipped the 13th series at some point.
I would imagine so.
As was the custom of the day. Well, you see, Packard is really kind of out of the luxury market at this time, although still the name had the cachet from the pre-war luxury models, the great 12 cylinders we were talking about earlier models, and the big 8-cylinder engines. But they were more of an upper medium price, kind of more on the upper end of the Buick scale, looking at competing more with Chrysler, and not really the ultra luxury like what Cadillac and Lincoln was cranking out at this time. But you still have the tried and true Packard engineering. You've got a 288 cubic inch inline 8. And indeed, Packard's also benefiting from the post-war sellers market, and we see a new mascot for Packard from what we saw earlier.
Yeah, the goddess of speed is gone, and we have a swan.
Indeed, the Packard Cormorant, in fact, which the Packard Club still refers to their club publication as the Packard Cormorant to this day, and carries a logo that looks just like that hood ornament right there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Another MG.
Yeah, another one of these wonderful sports cars in the true sense, brought over from the United Kingdom. And we mentioned already how American GIs kind of fell in love with these things when they saw them overseas, and some of them imported these cars back here after the war.
And this is 49 TC, exhibited by Mr. Rick Pete of St. Clair Shores, Michigan. And I'm wishing Mr. Stanford would have written a follow-up called The Black Car, so I could tell you about that story how it relates to this car. But still very much, the early sports car tradition. If you've ever to hop into one of these cars compared to the cars we just saw through here, be prepared for a rough ride, wind in your face, and a grin you probably cannot get rid of for the next few days from taking the car down the road.
Little note on this car is that it was spent 45 years in a barn before it was taken out and then received a full-on restoration, and it looks gorgeous.
Beautiful.
And I've always loved that they rated this car, the power output. It's an inline four-cylinder, 76 cubic inches. It is 54.5 horsepower. They wanted you to know it had that extra 0.5 of a horsepower.
That matters.
In case you were considering another car with just only 54 horsepower, this would be the one for you. It's that much better.
You got to claim everything you can get.
That's right. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing it with us.
To do the math on there, 1 horsepower is 746 watts, so this would be like another 370 some watts more than just a 54 horsepower car.
Thank you. All right, folks, we are going to step aside here, but we're going to move seamlessly into the next portion of the Passenger Review program with our 1950s cars. So do stick around. Thank you very much.